longevity is not a chronological age. It's very much health span. We don't believe the goal is to be 130 years old, but for the last 40 years be immobile, not cognizant, and tremendously ill, hooked up to a breathing machine. For us, it's how do you age as healthily, maintain organ health? And part of that is healthy, real supplementation. Part of that is healthy habits that are personalized to you.
Electricast. Welcome to Season 4 of Transforming 45. I'm your host, Lisa Boate, and this season we're stepping fully into our power. The heat, the hormones, the heartbreak, the healing. This is midlife, raw and redefined. Each episode, you'll hear stories of humans who are rewriting the rules, reclaiming their bodies, their desires, their voices. This is where we stop shrinking, start shining, and remember who the hell we are. Because midlife isn't a crisis, it's an awakening. Let's get transforming 45. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This week, I am really excited to welcome Danny Rudyak. He is an entrepreneur and investor on a mission to make healthcare proactive, accessible, and personal. His journey began at home supporting his father through multiple sclerosis and cancer, which inspired him to rethink how we care for our bodies as we age. With experience building and scaling companies across healthcare, digital media, and private equity, Daniel now shares his insights on longevity, transformation, and the power of turning life's challenges into meaningful change. Daniel, those are all our favorite themes on the show, so I'm so glad you're here today. Welcome to Transforming 45.
It's great to see you, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so let's start at the beginning. Who are you, and how did life introduce you to this version?
So, I'm just a person that's been tremendously influenced by his surroundings, his familial experiences, the experiences that my fiance, soon to be wife, has had, and someone that's been asking the question time and time again of why must we accept this, and is there a different approach? I think this kind of came to the forefront when I was 19 and started my first company, which was my friend and I sitting behind a cement mixing truck, asking that very same question, and then ultimately going on a journey of creating a rollable concrete product with the hope of eliminating cement mixing trucks, and effectively ended up patenting a product to help bring irrigation and erosion control in a more cost effective way to third world countries. So I've always been the individual to ask why. And must this be the case? Is there a different way to approach things? And I would say the question is much grander and much more complicated when we start thinking about healthcare, biology, anatomy, and the systems that we are constrained by on a country by country basis, whether it's legislature, regulation, best practices.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most fascinating things to me about talking to entrepreneurs is the very winding road that many of them take. So, starting with concrete mixing, and at this point here in healthcare, what do you think is the common thread that has woven its way through all of those different ventures?
Yeah. Well, I'll say I was quite young for my first company and decided that I was quite risk averse. I was still early on in my university, wanted to graduate, and I pursued a very traditional career in corporate finance. And that was focused on consumer businesses in healthcare. And for me, that was an interest fundamentally in learning about how all of these different businesses work, how do they vary, and getting into kind of the rinse and repeat pattern of understanding different businesses, how they operate and how they tackle big problems. I will say, for more than a decade, I then just pursued a job where I was a paid employee, and I learned a tremendous amount of skill sets, and kind of the way I think about life changed. But it was, I think that it takes a lot to want to leave something consistent where you're actually feeling as though you have your life figured out to some degree, and then turn it upside down, bring all this chaos into your world, although I hope it's generally controlled chaos and excitement, and decide to start something from scratch. So generally these paths are not linear, but sometimes there may be a catalyzing moment a friend, an experience with a loved one, and or a culmination of all these things that just force your hand. Some people choose to take a risk and some people don't. And for me, I was fortunate enough where I had two incredible partners that also had their own stories and wanted to take that risk. And it made me feel as though I wasn't alone in this challenge and journey, which I think was really the reason why I felt comfortable and the motivation to proceed and start something and build something.
Yeah, that catalyzing moment is really interesting and different for everyone. And certainly I had my own after 20 years as an educator in the public system. There were lots of factors that fell into why I needed to leave education. One of them being I could no longer not listen to what I knew to be true to be best for children, especially post COVID. And launching something totally new and different was really challenging. And I'm watching a lot of really powerful women making the same decision to move from something that has kept them small and doing things that are against their moral code for a long time into creating something new, which I think is really exciting. And how are you seeing? I know you're working with women who are in this stage. How are you seeing that playing out in what you're doing now?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I would say one of my many inspirations was my fiance, not only from her experience in healthcare, which we can speak to, which was certainly a catalyzing and motivating moment for me to to really want to tackle a big mission like the one that we are tackling. But also she went from working on in a corporate marketing capacity, some very large brands, to deciding to take a chance on herself and be effectively the first senior employee at a company with only a name, no product, and seeing her success in this fashion brand Bray Pudding, where they have really excelled in creating unique high end cashmere shoes and products. And, her recent success, they were featured on Oprah's Favorite Things and Gwyneth Paltrow's gift list. And um, seeing that was tremendously motivational for me. I want to say that I also grew up with a mother who was tremendously entrepreneurial and only a sister. And to that end, we had a household that was very strong when it comes to the matriarchy and passionate about the things they do. So I do think that COVID created a moment in time where people can actually feel as though they have more accessibility broadly. I think Internet of Things had really kind of escalated, remote work escalated. I think that it just created an opportunity for more people to be willing, both men and women, to be willing to take a risk on themselves and a gamble. And it's
Yeah.
inspiring.
Yeah. I think it also created a little bit of space and time for people to think about
What
what do I
matters.
want my life to actually be?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the way I think about COVID, and I'm curious from your perspective as well, but maybe the first 6 or 8 months of COVID felt like 7 years of a relationship. When you're confined with a person or your family in such a way where your groceries are being wiped down, you don't know what's going to happen. There's so much uncertainty in the world. It really makes you think and have a moment of reflection. To your point, but it felt like at least 7 years in a short time span. What was your experience with your family?
Yeah, I come at this from a place of great privilege. I had a house that was large enough to very comfortably hold four of us. My kids were in grade 8 and grade 9 at the beginning, so they were independent enough that they could
Mm,
do that work on their own. My husband's job stayed stable, as did mine. It was challenging. My role at that time shift to helping educators set up their digital communities and classrooms, which was interesting. In a lot of ways, COVID was a gift for me, and I know that that is not the case for everyone. So I'm always very sensitive in acknowledging that. It gave me time with my kids that I wouldn't necessarily have had being at the ages that they were, that we really got to spend a lot of time together and enjoyed each other's company for the most part. And it gave me some space. And that's where maybe in opposition to a lot of experience, I actually felt my nervous system settle in
Mm,
not being tossed into the chaos of a different school every day, because that's what I'd been doing. I'd been going out and supporting educators, helping them with instructional strategies in their classrooms. And while there were a lot of things I loved about it, there were a lot of things that also were really, really hard on my nervous system. And so when I had a chance to settle, I really started to notice the physical impacts that that was having on me. And so it really eventually didn't even become a choice. It became like an imperative of I
mm,
have to change, because I know what I felt like in that time when my nervous system was calm, when I was okay, and I did not feel like that when I launched myself back into a school building. And so I think there's some connection there as to where Remedy RX has come from. So, what was that catalyzing factor for you that you decided this is something that needs to happen?
the story of Ready RX really kind of begins, as I said, with a deeply personal realization. We saw a gap in the healthcare world, one that was actually impacting the people that we loved. For me, it dates back all the way to my father and his experiences with multiple sclerosis and cancer and how I saw that be shaped and formed. And then it was watching my fiance struggle through a health crisis where she was misdiagnosed by two of the leading hospital systems in Los Angeles, told that she can go home. And we had to really find ourselves in a position where we had to advocate for ourselves. And once we did so, we were able to understand that she was septic and that her appendix had ruptured days prior and they were trying to send her home. And had they done so, her life would have been without a doubt at jeopardy. And after we got that scan, they said we have to go into emergency surgery. So seeing firsthand that experience, I would say it's for both men and women, and how they're left without clear guidance or support was the straw that broke the camel's back for me and from my aspect of the Ready RX story. And you see this continue to permeate through hormonal health and longevity. And so we at Ready are very deeply passionate about healthy aging and everything that is encompassed in healthy aging, right? And as it pertains to women's hormones, I certainly realized there were countless women out there who felt the same, a bit lost, maybe a bit nervous about hormone therapy, or just were unsure where to turn, or perhaps had no idea why these changes were happening and couldn't diagnose what they were. For my wife, fiance, soon to be wife, most recently, her experiences were with this buildup of endocrine disruption. She's certainly pre menopause, but hormones played a very vital role in her consistent debilitating migraines, inability to sleep well. And we didn't know what it was. And we struggled for over a year until we were introduced to a hormone specialist. And I can't begin to tell you how astounding it was. Within weeks, these debilitating migraines started going away with some hormone assistance, and she started sleeping better. So it was pretty life changing. And it doesn't only impact you, the woman, the individual, but it also impacts everything around you, your interaction and relationship with your kids, your interaction and relationship with your husband and loved ones. So it's really getting back to a place where you're comfortable again, right?
Uh-huh.
So Ready RX was born out of that desire to change the narrative. We wanted to create a space where both men and women can feel empowered and informed, where they could access personalized care without feeling like they're navigating a maze of outdated information or stigma. And doing this in a doctor controlled, personalized way where we're working with some of the best pharmacies nationally to create formulations that work best, that are bioavailable, bioidentical, to help with the healthy aging process, as well as the support that is required along the way.
Here are the two things that I always hold in my head at the same time. So, one, American, Canadian, our healthcare systems are very different. But the thing I think that they have in common is that they are massive machines that move at an incredibly slow rate of change, which is part of the reason. Well, I mean, it's the majority of the reason why people can't get the care that they need. looking at it from my specific lens of menopause, perimenopause care, and women's health in general, there is such a low baseline when it comes to what knowledge and understanding the majority of practitioners hold. And so the question in a public system that is underfunded and overburdened is, how do we support practitioners? Because I believe they got into that role to give people the best care possible. So how do we support them as humans to not completely burn out and to learn everything they need to learn? So there's the publicness of it. And then we also know what the issues are with private systems, where there is significant inequity in what people are able to access. So from your perspective, I'm wondering, how do you hold that, like the behemoth of the machine, and creating accessible ways for people to get what they need?
There's a lot to unpack in what you just said. I'll start with the biggest challenge that we face broadly, period, is one of the earlier things that you had outlined, which is I think that doctors are excited by this time, what's going on right now, because in many ways, best practices aren't defined. In many ways, it's an art and not a specific science, in that it's not the same for each individual patient. It's very personalized. And so there's creative freedom. And for many doctors with whom I speak, that's very exciting. The flip side of that is, to your point, we have had multiple decades of doctors not being trained in hormone therapy. And so we have a lack of knowledge therein. And I would say the biggest challenge ReadyRx faces to date is finding more and more tremendously competent, well-versed, exciting doctors who really, really are expanding their scope, always learning and trying new things. And so I think this will certainly change in the next couple of years. But anyone who tells you that there isn't a issue with the quantity of doctors available to treat this would be absolutely lying to you, as a matter of fact. So that's that element. I do foresee that this will become one of the hottest areas in health. And to that end, I do foresee that you might not have this issue in 5 or 10 years down the line. And so it's really something that we have to deal with in a short-term setting. That's the doctor side of things. And the way that ReadyRx overcomes that is we try our best to really focus with endocrinologists and lead our hormone therapy with experts in hormones, right? And or folks that have had tremendous experience treating others throughout the years with menopause or pre or peri or post. So that's how we're approaching it. The accessibility issue is in many ways outside of the value that we provide. Obviously, our system is, to your point, very different than Canada. Outside of the comfort from your home, high quality, personalized care with video interactions with doctors that really know what they're doing, and specialized, personalized medication coming from pharmacies that batch and potency test everything, if it to the extent it's compounded and not commercially available, and then the ongoing support that you get, whether it's community or our internal webinars with industry leaders, or your dedicated health coaches and meal plans and all the things that we do, lab testing, so on and so forth. It's the accessibility component, right? It's our goal is with economies of scale to pass those benefits on to the consumer such that whether they're covered or not by insurance, the cost is so tremendously low. So for example, I'm not going to say exactly how much my fiance paid, but I'll just tell you that our holistic service, and there isn't a one fee for this and one fee for that, is about 90% less than what she paid. And that's inclusive of medication. So really it's how do you take economies of scale and a lot of data and information to create a incredibly precise, personalized program that's holistic. But instead of taking those economies of scale and having large margins that you pass on to your shareholders, you pass on to your shareholder constituents, which are your customers. That's how you create accessibility. That's what we're doing, not to suggest that there won't be millions of clinics opening up, charging $800 a visit and $800 for multiple months of medication, so on and so forth. I am certain not only is that already the case, but it's continuing to increase. And for us now, it's an education game, is letting people know that we're there, that we're available to treat them, and being transparent surrounding the costs there. I think that we still have a long way to go from, you know, we're fortunate. We started building this 6 months ago, not knowing where the FDA was going to go. It just, we got fortunate with that, mainly because you have multiple decades of women who are scared of HRT, and now you have something that can counteract that. And you can, you know, the best thing is to take accountability and say, hey, your heart health, your cardiovascular health, it's a matter of fact that with the appropriate personalized hormone therapy gets better as you age when you're on hormone therapy, bone density, so forth. So I would say we're part of the way there. We have a lot of legislative challenges still to kind of overcome. And companies like ours are hopefully how we're getting this out to the masses and accessible within the United States, that is to say. There's so many moving pieces, from the doctors to the legislation to the accessibility to
Yes.
how does Canada and Europe deal with it, and not having uniformity of thought. That's kind of one. It's how does testosterone play into all of this? Everything has been very estrogen, estrogen, estrogen.
Yes.
You're seeing more and more acceptance and adopting, an adoption of testosterone therapy for a lot of things, migraine, so on and so forth. There's only increasing studies. It's not yet fully determined. So it goes back to that subjectivity of care and personalizing and testing and learning. So there's a lot to be done, I think, in the next several years, which is exciting, but definitely makes it a exciting challenge. It's not just clear cut.
Yeah, an exciting challenge. And personalized medicine is really, I think, at the heart of a lot of this, in making sure that we are actually meeting people's needs. And when there are so many complex pieces in that, so like you mentioned, legislation, one of the changes that you referenced was the removal of the black box warning in the United States on estrogen products, which takes away all of that really terrifying language. So when that happened in the US, I actually went and looked at my own estrogen product to look at like what, because as a coach, I knew a lot about it. So I didn't read the product label when I brought my own estrogen home. So when I went and read it, it had pulled sentences directly out of the WHI report stating very clearly that this would increase the rate of heart disease, cancer, all of the greatest hits that came out of the WHI that we now know over decades of research are not true.
No, I was going to say, I'll be kind to them and say at best, perhaps the reports were misinterpreted and the
Yes.
outcomes were perhaps misleading. But yes, I think that the way you described it is fair.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know that the intention behind the WHI was good.
Yes.
And it was the largest amount of funding put towards women's health ever. And there are good research studies actually that came out of it in other areas that have really helped to move women's health forward. And yes, the way it was misrepresented in lots of different ways has created, unfortunately, decades of women who didn't get the care that they deserve. So the removal of that box is really important. And one of the leaders I worked with who I always really respected talked about our newest best learning. But as humans who really like concrete, consistent things. We don't like this idea of we know this now, but it's likely that in a few years from now, it's going to be totally different, right? As humans, we don't like that, but it's our reality. So how do you build trust with people when we have all of these moving parts, the legislation, the changes in what we know and don't know, the ways that we access healthcare? How are you building trust with the people that you're serving?
So I'll break this up into kind of two, and I'll focus on hormone health, but I would say it's broad across longevity as well. I'll focus this on kind of two categories within hormone health. The biggest challenge are the folks like my mother-in-law who, during these very important periods of her life, as she was going through it, was told, you can't do this. And for the last 25 years was told, plus, you can't do this. And so, you know, after 25 years of being told something, the friction there is skepticism of why now. Certainly, we have political dynamics at play as well in the United States, where half or a little bit less than half of the population may have distrust in the White House, and that's just kind of democracy. But nonetheless, you know, is what they're doing right or wrong? And so I think that that group that has been trained for 20 years, have gone through menopause, there's a lot more friction in education, and it really is just a function of continuous education, being out there, and we try to do our best, with Facebook and webinars and being present and getting out there. But it is a challenge, and it's going to take time. To say otherwise would be, I think, overly optimistic and not realistic. But it's just not, it's persevering and not giving up surrounding the message and using data to inform why some of these studies and inferences might have been at bare minimum misleading. So that's that group. I really think that the women who are in pre, peri, and menopause, this stigma surrounding estrogen, but it wasn't as impactful to them in their personal life and their hormones. So I think that there's a lot less friction there. And perhaps because they haven't been told for 25 years when they're going through this massively life changing experience not to do something, they're going to be very open to anything that will let them feel normal again. So I think that, candidly, I'll say it even for my fiance, out of desperation, how do I get back to normalcy? When you come to that place in your life where you have to, something has to change, you're often willing to try anything. So I think it's just that's, I'm now broadly speaking about hormone replacement therapy, not Ready RX. I'm
Yeah.
just, this is my perception of the environment that we're in. I also think, as it pertains to now kind of stepping down Ready RX, this massive distrust in government. How could you lie to me for 25 years? How could you tell me these things and be so wrong? Perhaps an acknowledgement or not that the intentions were there, but ultimately the inferences were so wrong. I think that actually creates the opportunity for a trust in a non-government based company whose mission statement is aligned with preventative and prolonged health, as opposed to the healthcare system that we live in, which is very reactive. You're sick, here's a pill. Our whole mission is, how do you break that down? Because it's wrong. It's failed us. And for, we have an obesity epidemic. We have so much endocrine disruption from the microplastics and food that has been approved to be put in the system, and the toxins. So, there's just so much that when regulation kind of didn't do its job, that I think that creates a unique opportunity for folks that really care to do our best, providing the best quality of service, the best support, to gain that trust.
And I think that approaching it from a proactive place is an important part of that because, like you said, everything in healthcare has been reactive so far. But we know that when we are proactive and we put strategies, routines in place that are supportive of our health, longevity, and well being, it leads to much better outcomes than the reactive
Mm.
nature of it. So, what are the sort of foundational principles for you and Ready RX around longevity?
For my co-founders, they all either personally have struggled with health issues or similarly have had near family members have an expedited deterioration, which really is humbling. So I would say we wanted to start this business so that we wouldn't allow for the future and for our children to have to experience that, at least minimize, have some humility to understand perhaps we can't fully prevent it, but minimize that experience. For us, longevity is not a chronological age, it's very much health span. By that, I mean, we don't believe the goal is to be 130 years old, but for the last 40 years be immobile, not cognizant, and tremendously ill, hooked up to, perhaps a breathing machine. For us, it's how do you age as healthily, maintain organ health? And part of that is healthy, real supplementation. Part of that is healthy habits that are personalized to you. It's eating. So it's not, hey, come to ReadyRx for a product and that product will get you healthy aging. It's a whole package. And we would never deceive someone to say, just do this one thing and you'll live a longer, healthier life. Although there are probably some best practices that are holistic that you can exercise on. But for us, our mission is education, reinforcement of better habits, and providing the highest quality of supplementation. As a matter of science, when you get to a certain age, the vitamins, minerals, proteins, telomeres start degrading in your body, and having appropriate supplementation to ensure that you age in a healthy way is important. Unfortunately, a lot of the supplement industry is predominantly unregulated. So you have these vitamins and pills that aren't available to your body. They're not bioavailable. You can't metabolize them. So you're only getting a small fraction of the actual nutrients that you need. So finding the best liposomal or injectable variations of that to ensure you get those nutrients and do that in a doctor controlled setting and do that from the comfort of your home at a cost effective price. And everything that goes into that's personalized to you, in addition to enforcing better habits, that's the mission. That's the goal. All of the members of the team are patients, right? So I would say we built it for ourselves, and our goal is to make being healthy cool again.
Make being healthy cool again. Yes. It's interesting because when I do a keynote and we go through all of this is menopause, perimenopause, postmenopause, this is how it's impacting us. And then I get to that and this is how we start to feel better. And it's a slide that has movement, nutrition, stress management, and sleep. And yes, there is the fifth pillar of the pharmacological piece. I always start with the lifestyle factors, however, because those are things that we actually can start to do right now. And
They
without those,
cost nothing.
they cost nothing. And without those fundamental pieces, the pharmacological pieces don't work as well either. And it's so hard to present people with that information, going back to your making being healthy cool again, because it's just not sexy. Right? Like, again, as humans, we want one thing that is really easy that we can snap our fingers and our problems are solved.
That's
And
exactly right.
yeah, and it just isn't our reality. And so, what are some of the motivating pieces that you are able to put in place that help people make that connection? That the lifestyle factors, and I want to talk specifically about GLP-1s because it's a hard conversation. It's loaded with so many issues. And in the UK was just um, outlined as being the number one treatment for obesity. And the thing I worry about the most, and I wish they had done, is paired that with resistance training. Because if you are on a GLP-1, it does not discriminate. Like monitoring bone density and muscle mass is key if we are on that. So when people see GLP-1s as that silver bullet, I can just take that and it's going to solve all my problems, but it doesn't. How do you help people really look at the holistic elements that need to be in place for that?
Yeah. Uh, Start with saying everything you just said, I completely agree with. I'll also say that while we do offer GLP-1 therapies, we're not a weight management company and we are not a GLP-1 company. It's just a tool in the toolkit for healthy aging, as you kind of outlined. At no point in time did we ever offer it without also offering inclusive, personalized meal plans, which emphasized protein intake and optimal nutrition to ensure, to your earlier point, that you minimize the likelihood of the muscle loss and really try to focus on the muscle retention and regain whilst decreasing visceral fat and fat. So that's one. The other thing that we did at the exact same time is ensure that we have health coaches for absolutely 100% of all customers. So every single customer gets a call. Now, does does every customer pick up the phone? No, but every single customer gets a health coach, and we do our best to get someone on the phone and spend time with them going over their personal needs, their personal circumstances, and outline best practices from a holistic perspective, not medicinal, but holistic perspective, emphasizing sleep, muscle, hydration, and focusing on those needs, because the way that we view GLP-1 is nothing more than a catalyst. It's not the end solution. And then we have weekly recurring support groups. So a lot of people feel as though there's potentially still, although I think the stigma is changing, something embarrassing about being on GLP-1. I would say there's a good portion of culture now that thinks it's cool to be on GLP-1. I'd rather that than anyone feel embarrassed about it. But the health coaches allow for a more private environment. The support sessions allow for community to come in and actually communicate and talk about their wins, their best practices, all in a highly monitored setting. I think that these pillars are how you get there. And then there are different iterations that I think are near term for us, which are data driven. So it's lab based and information based on lab, personalized to you, data from your wearable technology and or past medical history that can continue to personalize. If you become more aware of what you're deficient in and like your unhealthy habits, I think it's also a reinforcement tool, right? It's building habits is a lot about reinforcement, and changing habits is that. So
Huh.
when you're constantly informed that perhaps you're not doing something, creating positive reinforcement, and even sometimes, and we've toyed around with the idea of monetizing it in platforms, so you get almost paid to build these healthy habits. We're willing to tackle everything here to create. But one of the most difficult things is to change your habits, and it's to break that down and help people build healthier habits, and not never do we create the perception that if you take one medication or one supplement, call it GLP-1s, that's the silver bullet. And we would never ever articulate that messaging.
Yeah. So I'm really excited about a number of things that you're doing. And so we know that the way forward in terms of consistent change is internal motivation, right? And having health coaches and community and telling people that they matter
Hmm.
is really what's at the heart of that, of building that internal motivation, which is what has been missing from the healthcare system. So when I look at the system, it's the thing I've always thought, that we need to have health coaches that are assigned to every person for lots of reasons. One, you get a diagnosis, or you need this blood test, or this is the medication you need, or this is our recommendation for what you need to do. And you have this wealth of information, but actually translating it to what it means for you and your own lived experience and reality and how it's going to actually make a difference to improve your health has not existed up until this point. And so I think I'm really grateful, actually, that that is what you are implementing along with all of the other pieces, because it's key. That is the key to helping people actually make change. And then creating community is the other part of that. Been in conversations in all kinds of different contexts lately about how the missing piece of community that went away in our digital world is what we need to really build and focus. And so digital community can be helpful. Like, it's a great place to start, and then making real world connections as well.
It's funny you say that. I think that we live in the most lonely time ever. It's the most exciting time from an advancement, the exponential advancement in technology. Maybe industrial revolution is probably the most akin, or thereafter, perhaps the computer and internet. But this is just, it's leaps and bounds, and it's continuous. So I think that's exciting, but we live in, without a doubt, the most lonely time. You have to tackle it in real life as well. It's a little more difficult to scale than you can something virtually, as you know, across country or even globally. But I think that both need to exist, and a sense of community and friendship I'll go back to where we started with this conversation. If I was alone, I would never have built this company. So having people along for the ride with you that are passionate, that care for you, that personal connection, that's what we are, to your point, trying to bring to life with these health coaches. And so this data that you get, you take a big lab test, could be pretty scary. You can try your best through technology to explain, but there's nothing quite like having someone that you can just talk to that just cares. And so also it's finding people in, our team that really do care. And we try to only work with people internally that are mission and culture aligned. I will say it's a very sad time in terms of social media and its impact on human interaction.
It is. And it's why these businesses like yours that are mission aligned and that focus on humanity are more important at this time than ever. So thank you so much for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today. I think you are doing really important work. And listeners, all of the information for how to access Ready RX will be in the show notes. Make sure you check that out.
Lisa, thank you for having me. And to your point, for anyone who's interested, readyrx.com. It's as simple as that. All of the information's on there. And I really appreciate you having me today.
Thank you for hanging out with me on Transforming 45. If you laughed, nodded, or had an oh wow moment, hit follow and share it with your favorite midlife human. Find me on Instagram at @lboat and keep those transformations coming.
Electric acid.